Good evening and welcome to Nurturing Our Roots. This is your host, Antoinette Harrell. I'm sorry that my co host will not be joining me. We're going to do a special edition weekly until we can just get all the stories that we can possibly get in. My guest joining me tonight is Alvin Blakes. Alvin has a very extensive blog. Tonight he'll be talking about the importance and what are the benefits of blogging. So let me just welcome my guest. Hi, Alvin. How are you?
Hi, Antoinette. Thank you for having me again.
It is indeed a pleasure to talk with you. I just, first of all, want to commend you on all the work that you do. I know it's just tiresome. It can be long hours, long research, but thank you. You are doing a tremendous job, and I'm very pleased that you're going to share something with us tonight.
Yes.
So, before we get into your presentation tonight, I would like to just start off with what compelled you to start blogging, Alvin?
So I took a writing course back about 4 years ago, um, and in that writing course, we talked about writing books, blogs, other forms of expression, and I think I came to the conclusion at that time that blogging was an effective way of communicating. Writing in books is a permanent handwritten piece or a printed piece that you can see. But blogging it has the live feel to it. You're telling stories, first of all, that you're able to write down, but you're also able to get live feedback. A blog is
Mhm.
flexible in that you can change it. You can decide to blog on one subject and then go to another subject. You can blog in a different style, and you maybe it's a little more stylish than writing a book. So you can have one blog that is in one style, one format, another blog that's in another. So it gives you flexibility, but at the same time, you're creating a subject matter that is it's really live. It's a breathing document that you're getting comments on it. You're responding to comments, and then your next blog can reflect something based on those comments if you wanted to. So for me, right now, the blogging is to get some of my research out there or a lot of it out there, and then think about other forms of writing later. But that would be the main reason.
Alvin, how long have you been blogging?
Let's see, almost 3 years now.
Oh.
Yeah,
Mhm.
almost 3 years.
Do you cover a specific area as or is it in generalized or you concentrate your interest in a particular area?
No, my blogging right now is focused in a specific area. It's focused on my family as the center of the blog, and then it
Hmm.
focuses on my family. Then it shows the connection between that family and how it defines a certain community, and then it goes wider to a local and a national um, data or facts of my community. So it shows my community evolving from a specific family member to a community to a larger a larger body, and the goal is to go, all the way back, all the way back. And so,
And what areas is that you focus on?
so the area I focus on, all of my family, up to my all of my family is from one location. They migrated, not migrated. They were forcibly migrated into Wilkerson County, Mississippi, the
Hmm.
town of Woodville. All of my family on all sides, all my paternal lines, all my maternal lines.
That's
Uh,
great.
yeah, focus
Yeah.
into one
Yeah.
area for some strange reason. They didn't come from a mixture of people, but they concentrated in that one area. As I'll show you today, some of that.
And that's great because oftentimes you hear that my maternal side is from this area, my paternal side is this area, but that's really great that you have all of your research kind of concentrated in one area. And Alvin, I just want to say from my own point of view about blogging is it's a great way for me to share information with my family members, with the community family. And I try to post a photograph in all of my blogs because it's my way of preserving those photographs. You know, we've been seeing tornadoes more than we have ever seen in Louisiana. And I'm always thinking about what happens if my office was destroyed, a library is destroyed. And I thought that sharing with family members that would ensure that somebody else have some of the information that you shared. So does that play any part with you? Or can you talk about is you're looking at preserving electronically now? Is that important?
It is important. I am preserving electronically, and I am sharing. And as I said, I'm getting feedback all the time. But I think it's important that a blog be a living document. I think it's important that a blog be a platform where other people can contribute through comments,
Mm-hmm.
and they can guide your research. If it's a way of putting it out there in the universe, so to speak, and having people reply back to that. So everybody who writes on a particular subject doesn't know everything, but we have so many, I would say, thousands of cousins who have information out there, um, who have information to give, but they need to make that connection to something, to someone who they can give that information to.
Do other people share photographs and stories with you about any specific subject that you're writing about?
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. In fact, I've got two stories from, and I'll talk about that later, about the oral history. Two stories from younger cousins. The cousins I talk about mainly are the ones who were, were 95 and 100 when I interviewed them. Now I've got younger cousins who say, somebody's told me a story, and somebody told them a story, and somebody told them a story. So one of the things I'll be saying, emphasizing today, is that all of our oral history, all of our family history is not lost.
Exactly.
We thought it
Mm-hmm.
died with people who were 90 and 100. It's not true. They told other people, but those people have to have a connection, someone to talk to, someone to give that story to. So I have some really exciting stories that I'm hearing from people, who are fairly young, 60 years old, that age range, 65 years old, and it's really exciting that they reached out to me on not just that kind of issue, but other issues dealing with property and family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I know that you have a PowerPoint that you would like to share with us, and if you would like for me to go ahead and pull it up, I can do so.
Yeah.
Let me just take it back to number one. Okay, here we go.
So we're going to be talking about remembering family, community, and forced migrations. My blog is almostdisappeared.com, and I would appreciate it if everyone who's listening, you subscribe to the blog, send me comments in the blog, and send me your feedback when you read the blog. So the background is this blog that I'm reading. I've been working on. The current blog is on a particular plantation where, on my father's side of the family, and I've worked on this blog for over a year, dealing with the family history and cataloging the records, discovering the ancestors, and telling their stories. So,
Mm-hmm.
what I'd like to go over, Antoinette, today, remembering family. A lot of what we discover in genealogy, when we do our research, we discover ourselves, our family. We can go way back, but we find them as property. They're
Mm-hmm.
property of the slaveholder. So we find a name, we find an age, we find a location, but it doesn't tell us anything about them. The reason is because, again, they were property. They're listed just like livestock. They're listed right on the same area
Auto property, yes.
as property, but that's not going
Mhm.
to tell you anything about who they were. If we want to know something about who they were and bring life to our stories, it's going to be through oral history. Um, I've interviewed older family members. I'll go over a couple of those today. A lot of it has to do with what questions being asked, and this is for people
Mhm.
who are doing this. What questions are being asked? Do you ask that person, "Do you remember your grandmother? Your great grandmother? What do they remember?" And a lot of it depends on who's telling the story.
Mhm.
We have a lot of family members who tell stories, and we dismiss them. They may or may not have the credibility, but sometimes the information they tell us, it sounds kind of foreign. I mean, could that really be true? And so that's part of it, going back and being inquisitive as to what story they're telling, who told them that story, and who is doing the right. If you're interviewing, who is doing the writing of that story, um, and why did they remember that particular story? Everybody doesn't remember everything, but
Right.
you'll find out that some stories are passed down from generation to generation, and they're passed down for a reason. Okay, so I'll show you, I think, a pretty good example of that. Remembering community history. Our history as a community or a plantation goes back a lot of times to when we were shipmates together during the transatlantic voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. We were shipmates together. We were different African nations. We communicated. Some of us ended up on the same plantation. In that plantations, if you go back far enough, in this case, in this particular analysis, I go back to 1776 in
Mhm.
Mississippi, and I know who the earliest family members were. So As they begin to grow, that those are the earliest family members that we have on that plantation. And so the goal is to name them and to honor them as our early ancestors.
That's great that you was able to research it and identify it that far back, 1776. So that's great research. Mhm.
Absolutely. And so, and then our story really is one, the reason I named it Forced Migrations, it's really our we've gone through, as African people, we've gone through so many forced migrations. Over 10 million, well over 10 million people forced to migrate during the transatlantic slave trade, which some people call the Great Maafa, the Great Disaster, Trauma. 500,000 of those people from the African transatlantic slave trade ended up in the United States. Then they were located here on plantations. Northern and Southern owners shipped them between different plantations in
Mhm.
Virginia or Alabama or Mississippi, different areas. So that's another forced migration. I have one example of that. The domestic slave trade ended in 1808, and then by then, a million people, a million African people, were transported from Virginia and Maryland, northern that area, into the deep South, as we call it. So we went from the upper South to deep South. So many people were translated. One of the classic cases was in Savannah, where one day 436 people in 1857 were sold away from their family, and they call it the weeping time.
Would you
That's
repeat the number again, please? How many
I
people?
think about 436 people were
Mm.
sold off in one day, and there's a documentary about it called "The Weeping Time."
Mhm.
Sold away from their families to cover the debt of this slaveholder.
Is that documentary online available?
It is the Weeping
Oh,
Time. Actually, just type in the Weeping Time and you'll find it in
okay.
Savannah. Pierce Butler and that really traumatic time they had in Savannah. Um, And then I have a note here that were also voluntary migrations. They're not really voluntary. People ran away from
Mhm.
the area they were in the Civil War. People, whole plantations of people got behind the Union Army to get away from enslavement on the plantations. And then during Reconstruction, people in the South were often terrorized and moved again. So there's been several what I call, they're not really voluntary, but semi-voluntary migrations. The
Mhm.
point is, our people, if you want to study us, we're going to be in a lot of places, a lot of
That's
different times.
right.
We move a lot. And
And
so,
sometimes those places, when I first started researching my family history, my mother did not know anything about Amite County, Mississippi, or Carolina. And so she only knew of St. Helena Parish, Tangipahoa Hole Parish, and East Feliciana. But
mm,
as my research evolved, she learned about other places. So I certainly agree with you.
that's right. And they don't stay there. My family didn't stay in Woodville, but their earliest beginnings were in Woodville. And they began to move into to Louisiana, and some moved into the Delta.
Mhm.
Some ran away to Chicago. So they moved all around. But that was the genesis of it. So in December of 1998, I interviewed a cousin. He was 93, I think, at the time. I have to do the math, but 94 at the time. And so I sat down with him and interviewed him for 3 hours in Woodville. He lived on the same property that the plantation was on. In fact, he lived very near the slave quarters, which I'll talk about later. And I interviewed him. I had a tape recorder, and now I've transcribed a lot of that tape. And the process, though, of transcribing it is to do the work to understand what he is talking about, who he is talking about. That took years. It took years to understand. But here's a story that he remembered.
Can
So
you read that to us, please,
yeah,
in your words?
I'll read it. Yeah, and so he said, "Now listen, we're talking," and he said, "Now listen." He would say often, "They tell me in slavery time, this Edgefield tract of land here." This section of land, the government was letting it out to them soldiers. And this here fellow from West Baton Rouge, this Edgefield tract of land was deeded to him. It just went from family to family until Dr. Patrick came from New York and married a widow, and he came into possession of it. Well, them Persians, they come here. They were the ones that brought his half-white colored family with him on an ox wagon from West Baton Rouge. So I heard this in 1998. I heard it, but I didn't hear it because I don't know who he's talking about. I don't know what he's talking about. I really don't. I knew that I knew some of the names. I knew the name Percy. I knew the plantation they were on was Edgefield. But that's really I'd heard something about a Dr. Patrick. That's all I really knew. So then that begins the journey. So let's find out why he remembered what he remembered, and that's what I began to do. So the next slide is it dropping?
Yes, it dropped. Let's see. This is Alvin, you must always have some good things to share because we go through this too much, just
Mm.
too much. We will work with something before, but just keep talking. Let me see what I can do here. If there's anything,
Does the next one drop? Mm.
let's see. I think it picked up.
Oh,
Let's go
you're way
back.
too low. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I did pick it up in number 7, I think, number 8. So, what you do, if you would, just talk about what would have been in
Okay. Yeah.
5. I don't see anything in 7,
Oh my goodness,
6,
we saw it before
and
the show. I'm
5.
sorry. Okay.
4. Yeah.
So,
4, 5, 6, 7. You got to just like
oh
go
boy.
off
Okay.
the top
Here,
head.
sure. So first of all, everything that I'm going to talk about tonight is a summary of what's already in the blog. So I really would like for anyone listening to go to almostdisappeared.com. But the Percy that my cousin Samuel Miner told me about was Charles Percy. Charles Percy was born in about 1740 in England. He participated on the British side of the war in 1770. He was a British soldier. So the history on him and his family is that he left England and sailed to North Carolina. Then he sailed to the island of St. Eustatius and back to Florida. In my blog, I have a picture of that journey. From Florida, he traveled around from Florida, around the panhandle of Florida, into New Orleans. The next slide I show is a slide of just like in the oral history, he had an ox wagon from either New Orleans or he may have sailed up to San Francisco, but he had an ox wagon with his slaves that he required, his enslaved people that he had acquired, either in maybe he picked up some in North Carolina, maybe some in St. Eustatius, which is a small island near St. Kitts, Nevis, down in the Caribbean. And then Florida, he could have picked up some in Florida. And then he came into New Orleans with what's called a coffle, a slave coffle, people walking. They walked from New Orleans, they walked past Baton Rouge, past Port Allen, past San Francisville, where he stopped for a while and had a land there, and then into Wilkinson County, into Woodville. So that second map shows his transverse, his
Mhm.
path he chose, and walking, just as the oral history said, with an ox wagon from New Orleans into Woodville. The next slide was going to show what was the next slide going to show? I have my backup here. So that would tell you the migration. They migrated from wherever they were into Florida.
Mhm.
They stopped in Florida. They stopped in New Orleans, and then they walked into to Woodville, which is how
Wow.
people got around there with a coffle, with people chained to the wagon or chained, women, children. They walked into the area. Next,
Alvin, did it tell you at any time what time of year it was? Did you see anything that said the month? Because when I'm listening to you narrate about the walking, and you think about walking in the heat, you think about walking in the winter, you know, not fully clothed, just walking.
yeah, well, I have a slide that shows, and it'll come up later, the the slave trading routes in I think 1860. Most people in the Mississippi, Louisiana, most people in the area came from Virginia. As we said, 1808 was the end of the international slave trade, meaning you could not bring in. The U.S. said you could not bring in enslaved people from Africa. And so
Mhm.
what they began to do, though, is the ones they had here um, to trade those to the South because they had exhausted the land back in the East. It was mainly a tobacco crop. They had exhausted those plantation areas. And the soil, they didn't know to not overwork the
Mhm.
soil, and so they began to
Mhm.
invest in cotton and sugarcane. That's
Depleted
why they were
everything.
walking. So when they walked from Virginia, they came down what's called the Natchez Trace, from Tennessee down into the Natchez Trace. That's a 3 month walk, 2 to 3 month walk. That's a 2 to 3 month walk. And
Yeah.
I have a picture on the set of blogs that shows what the coffle looked like. You had people on horses and guns, the owners on horses and guns, and people's children and were up front. The men were usually in chains. It's a tremendous walk to come that path for
Mhm.
3 months. All your possessions, all your family, walking on slave, what's called a coffle, into the Natchez area. If you came
Mhm.
by boat, many came, and I have an example here of by boat. You came from that Richmond area around the Panhandle into New Orleans by boat.
Am I in the right slide for you? Have you caught up to speed?
No, not yet. I had
Not
one
yet.
more,
Okay.
one more, and
Mhm.
the other one. Again, all these are on the blog, almostdisappeared.com blog. Is the purchases that Charles Percy made in New Orleans, and so in Louisiana, in Mississippi, a lot of areas. Most of us are familiar with Gwen on the Midlow Hall. She just died, so
Yes.
she has a database. It's Afro database for Afro Louisiana history and genealogy, where she compiled the results of the courthouses, mainly in New Roads or Point Capee, of all of the ships coming in. It was the records were in Spanish, English, and French. Transcribed all of those records for all the ships coming directly from Africa to New Orleans.
Yeah.
So
I purchased that
yes,
when it
yes,
first came out. I purchased the CD. Yes.
yeah. So the point is what?
Mm.
Everybody didn't come through from Virginia. Some people came straight from Africa, Congo ships. People from
Mhm.
Congo, Senegal came straight into New Orleans. The companion book for this is um, Afro Africans in Colonial Louisiana. So I was able to go on that database, and I was able to extract all of the people that Charles Percy purchased
Mm.
in New Orleans.
Mhm.
There were nine people. I have a chart. I had a chart in the slide. It's in the blog. I
And we're
have
gonna pull up your blog. We
okay,
certainly have to do that.
okay, yeah, we'll pull it up.
Mhm.
And there's a chart that shows the nine people he purchased, and a lot of them were by family units.
Mhm.
An adult, a mother, and son. May 7th, 1793. I'll just read one of them. He purchased in Baton Rouge. Sometimes it would say who the previous owner was. He purchased one child. The ship name that he came on was San Jose. The captain was Jaime Badia from Martinique, brute slave, which means newly arrived from Africa. So from those records, I was able to determine who some of the early people were,
Mhm.
first people on that plantation. The
Right.
records show where he purchased some of them in New Orleans, the date he purchased, um, the purchase price, and that particular one there, that person came from the island of Martinique, dropped off from Africa in the island of Martinique.
Mhm.
So that catches me up to this slide where we are. I hope all the rest of the slides drop, but
Sure.
um, on this slide, I was able to chart, and this is referred to as cluster research. It is cluster research in the whole community. Um, when that was a document that showed who the enslaved people were on this plantation. This is just a section of that chart. And I've taken it and I've organized it according to family units.
Mhm.
So in 1794, Charles Percy died. He had a will. On that will, he had the names by family of the people and their ages.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Mhm.
And his property went to his wife and children. In 1804, his wife died. So there's another property log of all the property he had. That's 10 years later. So if you go on there, you see it's 10 years difference in the ages. The same people, but 10 years older. In 1819, that plantation was sold. His daughter, who had 1/4 of the plantation, married, and then the plantation was sold in 1819. Her husband died. So there's another list of who all is on the plantation
Mhm.
by name and age. So you see the same people on that plantation in 1794. They're 10 years old in 1894. They're older in 1819.
Mhm.
And in 1843, the plantation was sold again. And guess what? You can figure out that you can guess that the same people are there, and they're 20, what is that, 24 years older.
Mm-hmm.
Not just 24 years older, but they marry other people on the plantation.
With children of their own by that time.
Children of their own by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1870, they're on the 1870 census, some of them. The same people, but this time they have 1870 was the first census that had our last name on it. It wasn't the first document at all the times, but the first census by last name. So go by last name and work backwards, and you know what the family names were when they came into there, 1776. The thing that's interesting about it, none of them had only one small family had the Percy name. So the others used the names they had when they were either in Virginia or someplace else. And so that's what this chart is showing. This is just a portion of the chart.
Mm-hmm.
So the significance of this is I was able to chart who people were, who their mothers and fathers and great grandfathers were over time, and then to see what families they married from. So
I have a question. I see that you have the Anderson family in its peach color, and
mhm.
over here in the chart you have the highlights in peach. What is there a relationship between the Anderson family and the other people that's
So
listed here?
what this is showing again, I'm sorry, you can see it on the blog. You can see it larger, but the color, the green color was the Blakes family.
Mm-hmm.
I showed you the whole chart. The minor family was the blue family. Anderson
Okay.
family is peach color. Anderson family, in this case, Big Anthony was the name of the person, the enslaved person. Big Anthony married Esther, who was in the Blake family. So you see
Okay.
that green line, and so that
Yes,
family
I
becomes
see it.
it becomes the Andersons.
Okay.
And so
So they married kind of multiple times, huh?
no. She is a if you see him up there, he's from the Anderson family though, because in 1870 his name is Anthony Anderson.
But I
As
see. Okay,
as an
maybe I just
enslaved
can't
person, they
see it.
called him Big Anthony. He only had a first
Mm-hmm.
name. As an enslaved person, he's Big Anthony. But in 1870, he said, "My name is Anthony Anderson."
Okay.
And Anthony Anderson married Esther, who was in the Blake family.
Mm-hmm.
So these are family units. They're housed together. I found out they were housed together separately in what's called the slave quarters.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I know who married who. I know some of the people. So I want to go now. I don't want to read this. I want you to go to the, if you will, I want to read this from my blog.
Okay.
If you can go there, because
And we'll make sure we pull your blog up as well.
sure, you need to pull it up to see this. Yeah, I'm going to read from that blog.
Mm-hmm.
No, not here on the previous slide. I want to go to the blog instead of that slide. I want to go to the blog right now and show.
Okay, let me just get out of this. And let's try to pull the blog up.
Okay. Very good. So if you'll go back one blog, if you go down to the bottom of this blog and click the
Mm-hmm.
arrow to the left, go down, keep going down. This is good because people can see how to do it. Click the arrow to the left.
Okay,
Now go down right there. Click it.
right
No,
here.
blue right here. Click that, and it'll take you back one blog.
Okay, just waiting for it to pull up.
Okay, there it is. Okay, this particular blog is the one I want to talk about. So,
Mm-hmm.
what I want to do is probably, because one of the things I realized tonight, everybody doesn't read well. So I want to read. I'm glad you asked me to read the other thing because I think it's very instructive to read for people to hear what is going on. So
Mm-hmm.
let me just read it. And these are profiles.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I said when you see these names on a slave list, a property list, that's property. We don't know anything about that property. The way we
Mm-hmm.
learn about that property is by talking to someone. The oral history tells us who they were. If you have that oral history, be able to try to catch together something about that person. Instead of just being a name on a tree, we can actually give a personality to that person. So let me say this. So let me read some of this. I'll read some of this. My great grandmother, Adeline Douglas Turner, was born around 1815 and died June 7th, 1925 in Woodville, Mississippi. She and her husband, Nelson Turner, were brought from Richmond, Virginia into Woodville in around 1850 before the birth of their daughter, Anna. Their children born in Woodville were Anna, Zachariah, twins Melvina and Amanda, Celeste, Robert, William, and Letty. I don't know the origins of her middle name, Douglas, but her full name, Adeline Douglas Turner, was always remembered by family historians. I've never heard any stories about the life of my great great grandfather, Nelson Turner, who likely died in 1869 after the birth of his youngest daughter, Letty. And his name does not appear on the 1870 census or in any documents that I found. I had the honor and privilege of interviewing and recording two family members who knew Adeline Turner. As I have stated in earlier blogs, I interviewed her 94-year-old great-great-grandson, Samuel Booker Minor, whose grandfather, Pharaoh Minor, married Adeline's closest daughter, Anna. And so here's what he told me about her in that same interview. He said, they bought Grandma Adeline. I mean, that was my great-great-grandmother. Her name was Adeline. She lived until I was 21 years old. She left her first four children in Africa or in Virginia. They didn't buy them. You could buy the daddy and mama and not buy the children, as you could buy the children and not buy the mom and daddy. Well, them people, Dr. Patrick and them, his daddy was the one that buys the slaves. They got free under Dr. Robert Patrick. His daddy was Jesse Patrick, and he the one brought the slaves. He come from Virginia, and that's where they captured them, in Virginia. So that's one of the 1998, the 94-year-old cousin is telling me that story. And then I have another one. I interviewed Celeste Blake Sturgis, another cousin, at her home in Baton Rouge in late December of 2000. She was the granddaughter of Adeline Turner, Turner's oldest daughter, Celeste Turner Blakes, my great-grandmother. During the interview, which was a family discussion with three of her daughters and two of my cousins, she often said she did not have a good memory of her early life, but to my delight, she was full of laughter and wit, and she answered most of my questions about Adeline Turner. She died in Baton Rouge in February 2001, a month after the interview, and 2 weeks before her 100th birthday celebration. And here's what Celeste Turner Blakes, who was born in 1901, and she died in 2001, 100 years old. Here's what she remembered about her great-great-grandmother, Adeline Douglas Turner. So she's born in 1901. Adeline Turner died in 1921, so she knew her. For 21 years, she knew her. Here's what she said. Yeah, I remember her. I was at her funeral. She was living with her daughter. She was living with old lady Anna Minor. She was living with her when she died. But now how old she was, if you don't ever talk and have no record or nothing like that, it gets away from you. They dug the grave and a strong rain came. They had to cover that grave over with planks to keep some of that water out. They had to get the water out of the grave to bury her. I was at her funeral. They was together, Nelson and Adeline. They sold them together. They left two daughters in Virginia. She never seen them no more. He must have died before my time. They left two daughters, two children, two girls she left behind during slavery times, and they brought her to this country. Old man Dr. Patrick, he brought them to this country. They were selling them like cows. Dr. Patrick had her as a nurse, but she couldn't wait on no black people. He brought her as a nurse. He had her as a nurse just for the whites. I went there once looking for the place, the place that they were bought from. I've been to Virginia, but I never did find nothing. I don't think she talked exactly like we talk. She had a little bit of an accent, but she could understand what you were saying. I remember her well. She had long, long hair bright, bright white. She would get up every morning. Her hair was long and white, and she would put it in a big ball on top of her head. So that's a recollection of someone who knew their great-grandmother, who was born in 1815. And so, again, the memories that people have are long memories. If you remember if you knew someone who was born in 1815 and lived, Adeline Douglas Turner, by the way, lived to be 110 years old. So she didn't die till 1925. So she was able to tell them a lot of the stories that they remembered. And so that's very important that we talk to people who had direct hand information. And she told them she came from Virginia, and her two daughters were sold away from her in Virginia. And And so when
Yeah, I was listening to you as you narrated and just read. It was like I'm thinking about the sadness of her leaving, her two daughters behind, and that was really, you know, um, when
it
you
is,
think about it,
it is.
it was painful.
Yes, yes. And she remember again, she had 8 children after she was brought here. She was brought here to be the nursemaid.
Hmm.
Uh,
And just to hear that she could not do any nursing on the black people, but only for the white people,
yeah,
you
and
know.
no one's asked me this, but when you say in slavery times she was a nurse, and no one told me this, what does that mean?
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
because nurse can mean several things. It can mean wet nurse.
Hmm.
Wet nurses were um, um, enslaved women provided the milk and nutrition for the slave owners' children.
Hmm. Yes.
The wet nurse, yeah. So, no one has said that's what it is, but when I heard that, I said, "That's what does that nurse mean?" And so a lot of times their babies were not nursed by them. The white babies were nursed by them. I don't have any evidence that that's what it was, but it began me to look into that's a whole phenomenon itself called wet nurses. And so I
Hmm.
began to look at that in terms of how, just how that works. So that's just one of the things, one of the traumas that we went through.
Okay, so you want me to come out that particular and
Yeah.
go back to the
So come up
slides?
and go back to the slide. Yeah.
Okay, so
Because
I need to,
that's a migration story.
yes.
So if you can go back to it, I want to show you the map, what's called slave trading map routes, slave trading routes. Yes. So Virginia is at the top right. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it said she came from Virginia. She was shipped by boat. So the little arrow there around that boat is the path they came around Florida into New Orleans, and sometimes a small boat could come up the Mississippi to Natchez, then back down to Woodville. You can see in the illustration. But as I said earlier, a lot of people in that area, they were walked. And I don't know if you have a pointer, but you can see the little dotted blue line in the middle by Alabama. That's the Natchez Trace we were talking about earlier. So
Am I looking at it right?
yeah, you're looking at it right. I don't know if you have a pointer you could show because I don't have control of it. But
No, I
the
don't
little
have the.
yeah, the little
Mm-hmm.
dotted line above Alabama, that's the Natchez Trace.
Mm-hmm.
So you walk from Richmond, and this is called the Armfield Coffle Route, and this is the slave traders,
Yeah,
uh,
right here, the little dotted lines here.
Franklin and Armfield. This is
Mm-hmm.
their route. Yeah, the little dotted
That was the
line,
route they took right there.
the route they walked, a 3 month
Oh
route,
gosh. Yeah.
3 month route, and so they're coming into to Natchez.
Mm-hmm.
It's Natchez and New Orleans, coming to New Orleans by boat, or New Orleans from Alabama into Natchez, into to grow this cotton in the New Orleans to grow this sugar cane.
Mm. Yeah.
That's the route they took. So let's read one more. If you go back to the blog, let's read. Can you go back to the blog?
Yeah, give me a minute because it
Sure.
takes a minute to
Hmm. Hmm.
get to it. In the meantime, just keep talking about.
Sure. So the next one is again another um, comment from the interview about it's talking about the grandfather of Samuel Miner, Pharaoh Miner, and again I go through to learn who he was and who his father was. His father was um, Jimmy Miner, and his father was Congo Miner. So again, in the early records, you see evidence that of what location that people probably came from. So go back one block, you see evidence of what location by the names in the this particular plantation, which is Edgefield, where where these families are. Go back one right there. That's the way you do it. Yeah. And so you see evidence of African names. Kwaku was one name in there. Congo was a name in there, and then there was another name of a person who
Am I in
I
the right place?
yes, yes. Another record said he was from the Igbo nation. No, you need to go back one more. Go back one more.
Let me try to get back. All right.
Now go back. Go to there and go back. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
There.
So
It's not going back one more.
No. So how do I go back?
You should click that and then go back. There it is. There it is.
Turn down the pot?
Turning down the pot. Yeah. So turning
Okay.
down the pot. What is turning down the pot? Some people may know what turning down the pot is, but through the oral history, I began. I became. I now understand what it meant. So if I just read, I can't read there. So let me read off my paper what turning down the pot is.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, again, I go through my charts and see who the early family members were. And during the interview with Samuel Manor, this is what he told me. Now, look, they didn't raise money on Sunday. And up there at Edgefield, don't you let near a nickel hit that church floor on Sunday. You left that money at home. They could come there and shout and sing and pray all right, but you'd come there Thursday night and pay the money to the preacher. That's the way I was baptized, paying money on the Sunday. That's the way I was baptized, paying on the Sunday. And I don't know, just before I married, I was amongst them old people and started to paying the preacher's money on the Sunday at Edgefield. Now, I don't know when they started to giving the preacher his money at Mount Olive on a Sunday. Them the only two churches I know was operating like that. Old man Farrell said you was polluting the church if you let a nickel fall on the floor on Sunday. He was kind of an industrious farmer, my grandpa, Farrell Minor. And if he had a watermelon there, he would hit that watermelon, bam, 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 and he would divide it in 4 parts. Now, look, you had to bite it out of there the best way you could. You couldn't use no knife. You were sinning. That was an abomination. I'm talking about my grandpa now. He was the only one I know it was that strict. You couldn't cut wood on a Sunday. Woodstock people cut wood on Sunday, but Edgefield people didn't. You don't use no axe on Sunday. They call themselves being strict religious people. If you're going to have a chicken to eat tomorrow, you had to pick that chicken Saturday and cut him up. You could cook him Sunday, but you couldn't kill him and pick him. Old man Pharaoh, he was born in slavery time, you know. They say them slaves prayed themselves off that slave list. They think prayer's done that. They tell me they didn't allow them to. The boss man didn't allow them to pray. And they would get the pot and go down the hill there somewhere and hide from him and put their mouth in that pot and holler. That's the origin of praying the pot or turning down the pot. Go down in the woods somewhere, turn that pot down and pray in that pot so you wouldn't be heard praying. So in researching this tradition of this phenomenon of turning down the pot, it really came when after and I talk about this in the blog, after the Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey rebellions where enslaved people were using the Bible literally to free themselves, to seek their freedom, to revolt, saying they had as much right to be free as any other man. And so there was a strict crackdown on religious services for enslaved people. A lot of them then had to go to services only where they had a white preacher, and they had that preacher and other people give them a strict doctrine: slaves, obey your masters with deep respect and fear. So this is a telling of the tradition in Mississippi also. This was part of that tradition that we're telling, specifically telling you who did it and how they did it. And so this is again, this can only come through oral history. He's talking about Pharaoh Minor. The name Pharaoh itself is interesting, to be named Pharaoh during slavery times. And it's just the only way you can know this kind of information. You can have names on a piece of paper. It's through that passing down of that oral history.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
And you just showed the connection between the two, the oral history, because listening to your presentation and what people have said in the interviews that there was no documentation. So the oral history was very important. The names, the places, and the stories that they remembered that was passed down to them. Very
Absolutely.
good. Very good research for you, Alvin.
Passed down. This is being passed down for a couple hundred years or longer. It was always passed down. Somebody told somebody else who told somebody else who is waiting out there. And I'm telling people, I'm excited because people are contacting me, waiting to tell those particular stories. I see the blog is I see it's a,
The picture finally, yeah, yeah. So I'm very happy to see that the picture, I guess technology, but that's the picture. Is this Samuel Booker?
yeah, semi minor, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, semi minor.
So since you've been through that, we're just gonna go
I've been
ahead and
through it. Okay,
like
this is again. This is be highlights. This is the path that Charles Percy took from North Carolina to St. Eustatius, around Florida, stopped in I think Pensacola, and then into Woodville. And this is the route he took walking. It was more than 2 days. That was
2 days,
I was saying Google
147
Maps. It was more
miles.
than 2 days. It was more than a 2 days walk from New Orleans up through
Yeah, look at 147 miles.
that took on a with a wagon with roads that were really not that advanced or developed. Past Port Hudson, stopped in San Francisco on to Woodville. So I've been over this, and this is the chart that shows
That you was
uh,
talking about.
I
Yeah.
named the people that Percy purchased in New Orleans. 9 people he purchased in New Orleans. Some of these early names were some of the early Africans. Many, by the way, who didn't live long, because in the early 1700s, the crop was not cotton; the crop was
Hmm.
indigo.
Hmm. Yeah.
Indigo was very poisonous. You had these big dye vats, flies, pots, flies, and everything polluted the vats, and people. Some of the early Africans got sick from this and died.
Mhm. For the
And
sake of time, I'm gonna slide through it right quick and kind of
yes,
catch you up with you for the
that's
sake of time because the time
right
is
there.
moving
That's
so
where I am.
fast.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this is the last. This will be the last slide. So I want to go back
Mhm.
and reflect a little bit on um, at the same time this person Amadou Hampate Ba. He's born in Mali in 1900, the same age as these people who are telling me these stories, right? They're the
Mhm.
same age, except one has now been transported over to America. This man is in Mali. He's the one who's credited with the saying, "Whenever an old man dies or woman, it is as though a library were burning down."
And
Meaning,
it's so true.
it's so true.
Mhm.
So he wrote a piece called "The Living Tradition." It's in the General History of Africa UNESCO report in 1980. He wrote this piece in 1980. And some of the things he says, we're going to show you the relevance of it today. This quote right here, Antoinette, reminds me a lot of you, reminded me of you because you're very much into at raising animals, chickens, and farming and crop. And he said, in Africa, everything is history.
Mhm.
Grand history of life includes the history of the lands, the lakes, and the rivers. That's geography. They understand the
Mhm.
history of the lakes and the rivers. The history of plants, that's botany and pharmaceutics. The history of the sons of the womb of the earth, meaning inside the earth, mineralogy and metals. The history of the stars, astronomy, astrology. The history of water. So everything from that perspective is history. You know the history of a thing, then you know that particular thing.
Exactly.
These
Wow.
are all. I had one more slide, and so
One
those
more
are all
time.
of, yeah, those are all of the um, kind of knowledge that we've not retained or we've lost. Uh, and so let me the final slide. He says in the living tradition, genealogist means historian. For a good genealogist knows the history and exploits of every person mentioned, or at least the most outstanding ones. This science, and he calls it a science, this science is at the very base of history in Africa. For people are so much interested in history, it is not on account of dates, but on account of genealogy. So it's a
Mhm.
trace of given family
Yes.
and or group as it spreads out through time and space. And that's what we're doing. So
That's
everyone is a bit of a genealogist in Africa and capable of going fairly far back in his own family tree. If not, it would be as if he had no identity card.
that's right.
In old time Mali, there was no one who did not know at least 10 or 12 generations of his forebears.
Mhm.
And finally, this final quote I'll give you because it's applicable today. I don't know of anyone who's not struggling in the South to get their land back or to retain their land or to divide their land. So he says genealogy is therefore at once a sense of identity, a means of exalting family glory, and a resort in case of litigation. For example, a dispute over a piece of land could be settled by genealogists who would state exactly what ancestor had cleared and cultivated the land, to whom he had given it, under what conditions, and so on. So I'll close with that. Uh,
Yes, yes, yes.
I'll close.
Alvin, your presentation was so informative, so educational, and thank you for a great presentation. And certainly, I would like to open up for some questions if people have any questions. But in the meantime, let's take a quick little break and come right back.
Okay.
I also want to talk a little bit and thank you all about the upcoming blog that we'll be talking about. I'm sorry, the upcoming Zoom that we'll be talking about next week. You'll be joining us again, Alvin, on February 28th. Um, to talk about the new book that Bernice Alexander Bennett has published with all the many contributors of the book, Black Homesteaders of the South. And I am so happy for this book. Please tune in because, to talk about what everything that you talked about, Alvin, the land, that's very important. So please join in. Louis Ali found his ancestor, and I was one of the contributors to that story. Sailor Allen was a homesteader in Amen County, Mississippi. So I'm very happy that that story is in that book because, like the other stories, we're talking about the land. Once again, if you're in New Orleans, if you're not in New Orleans, join Bernice for the 2 weeks of Zoom discussion, March the 11th at 11 a.m. Author Talk, March the 18th at 11, Descendant panel. So if you want to register for that particular Zoom, you can see it right there and just jot that down. But we're looking forward to all these discussions about just find if your ancestors was homesteaders. I had the opportunity to listen to a presentation at the Livingston Parish Library, but we do want to mention that she did present at the Louisiana State Archives too. So congratulations to Bernice and all the success that she had there. So Alvin, is there anything that you want to tell us or share with us in closing about blogging and just encouraging people to start sharing that information? Eh, because I feel like this. When I find a picture of my ancestor, that picture do not just belong exclusively to me. I want to share it. What's your thoughts of that,
I
Alvin,
agree.
or
I
your
mean,
views?
everything you share, or it happens for me, it comes back to me tenfold.
Exactly.
Because
Hmm.
first of all, we need a platform where people can know that this information is important. They can read it and they can say, "Well, I know something I can contribute. I know a
Uh-huh.
story. I know a story I'll contribute." They have no other way of contributing it if they don't know that someone's looking for it. So it's like
Right, right. And we don't want it to be lost again.
yeah,
We
yeah,
do not want it to be. And we know, Alvin, that it is time consuming, but it's very important.
it is.
Very important.
It is important. It's not rewriting history; it's writing history. This is
Exactly.
this is history that's never been written.
Alvin, how often do you blog?
I blog about
Hmm.
monthly, unless I have some, if I have a presentation I have to prepare for something, I'll take some time off. But I try to blog every month.
Okay. Is that one story, two stories you try to get out?
It's one story.
It's one story.
Because
Hmm.
I want to give time for reading and comments, and I think that's a pretty good pace because of the amount of time it takes to get the details right and to
Exactly.
get it all done.
Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
Someone is saying, I want to write, but I procrastinate. Yeah, you just have to do it because sometimes your ancestors are speaking to you. So you just need to do it. You just need to make sure that you do it
Every
and
day
look
you got
at
to do it.
the
You got to
most
do it every
important thing is just do it.
day. Do it. Yeah. Yeah. You got to
Any
do it
other
every
questions?
day.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Or any other thing you want to share with us, Alvin? Because We really want people to start researching, and not just researching, but share the information as well.
Exactly. And so again, if anybody has heard this show, and I know something he doesn't know about
Hmm.
about this family, again, subscribe to the blog, send me your comments. I will write it back, and then we can go off the offline, off the blog, and talk in detail about it. Talk on the phone, whatever we need to do. But as I said, I'm excited about two stories that I've heard recently that talk about people who know who our ancestors were back in Africa who ended up coming over here.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's really nice.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. And so please put the name of your blog out there again so people can, um, you know, tune in.
Okay, it's in the presentation on the first sheet. Almost, one word, almost disappeared.com.
Mhm. One more time, please.
Almost disappeared.com. The word almost disappeared, one word, almost disappeared.com.
All right. So, Alvin, we do want to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. As always, it's been a pleasure, just talking with you and having you to share information with us. And once again, if anyone is out there would like to share your family history with us, please contact us at, nurturingourroots@gmail.com, and share whatever you have, because it will help someone when you think it's not. But Alvin, I have to agree with you with one thing. The more I share, the more I receive.
Yes, yes.
Have you
I
experienced that?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, first of all, none of us know everything. One of the things I like about that I like a whole lot about genealogy. You don't need a degree for it. You don't need any kind of degree for it. Every individual can do it. As Hampate Ba said in that article I read, everybody should be able to know their own history to get an identity card. That's what he said.
That's right.
You need an
That's right.
identity card. Yeah,
That's right. Everybody have it. So I
that's right.
just want to say to everyone that joined us tonight, thank you, thank you, thank you for tuning in tonight. And we really appreciate you. Thanks for watching. Thank you, Alvin, for being a great guest. And just keep researching, keep sharing your family history. And I like what you said, Alvin. We are not rewriting history, we are writing history.
That's right.
And no one is going to do that for us. And matter of fact, I don't want to put the pen in anyone's hand. It is my story to tell, my narrative, my experience, my ancestors, and it is your responsibility to tell the story of your ancestors. So thank you for joining us right here on Nurturing Our Roots. And please don't forget to join us next Tuesday. Alvin will be back again talking about his contributions to the book again. Thank you so much. And we appreciate you. Holly, please share this podcast and this Zoom sessions with everyone that you know. Thank you for joining.